Hello everyone, it's Megray, and this is a time-lapse of something I've been wanting to build for a long time, and I finally got around to doing it. The concept for this build was heavily inspired by a well-known Bible passage about putting on the armor of God. So here is my build of two knights face-to-face in a battle of good versus evil. I must say that getting a build started has to be one of the hardest things to do. For this build in particular, I decided to start with the horses so I could get a good idea of what size I was going for. And I used a World Edit Sphere brush to help me get the rough shapes, with a blend ball brush to help me kind of smooth it over. I didn't get it perfect here, I was just mapping out rough shapes and trying to figure out what pose I wanted. Now I have a rough idea of what size this build will be, so I can go ahead and create a base for it. Now this base again is not finished yet, but it's a good starting point for me to go ahead and paste my horses in. Now it's time to refine those shapes and get those finished up. To help save myself time building these horses out, I went ahead and made one horse head and then just copied it and rotated it for each horse. So copying assets is super helpful when doing two of the same organic. I did the same thing for the hooves too, where I made one hoof and I used it for all 8 legs. This helped me keep them consistent in size and also gave me a good chance to practice using Deform Rotate, which I just learned how to use and just did a tutorial on if you're curious. I probably could have smoothed these horses even more than I did here. It's just a never-ending process. You always see something that needs fixing. But like any build, you do have to move on at some point. Next comes the arduous task of adding armor to the first horse. And I say difficult because I didn't really have much of a plan going into this. I did look at reference photos to help give me ideas, but for the most part I did kind of make it up as I went. I also had to experiment a little bit with my block palette. I was trying to go for a gold look, and it's very hard to achieve with the color blocks we have in Minecraft. Sandstone and birch was the closest I could come up with. And just to make it look a little shinier, kind of like gold, I mixed in some glazed terracotta. The Archeon Loft tool was probably one of my best friends when making this build. Not gonna lie, I used it for almost everything. I used it for pieces of armor as well as for blankets and saddles, and you name it, I probably used it for it. If you're interested in learning more about the Loft tool, I do have a video link in the description in case you're interested in checking it out. There were some pieces of armor though I chose to do completely by hand just because of the tight spaces, and it's just easier to get those right just building them by hand. I used another Archeon tool to create the tail, the spike tool. It was super helpful to create not only curves, but to create them with one end being thicker and one end being thinner. Now comes the very scary part where I have to build my knight on top of the horse. I have to set my global mask to air so I'm only affecting those air blocks and not destroying my horse. With the rough shape of the knight, then I can start adding on pieces of armor, and the Loft tool was a huge assistance in this as well. Coloring the knight was no simple task either, since I wanted it to match the horse's gold armor, but I also wanted to make it look shiny and not so dull like the sandstone looks. For the shield on this knight, I wanted it to look really angelic and celestial, so I went ahead and added these wing patterns to it. It looks very unique, but it does look kind of cool at the same time. And just a few more final touches on this knight before moving on to the other one. For this next knight, I want it to be very dark and ominous. Well, I tried to anyway. I started with the armor of this horse, and I had to think about it in layers since there are a lot of layers of armor on this horse, and I wanted to make sure I was doing the underlying layers first and then just kind of layering them up a little bit at a time. Something that really helped me with the armor on the build, not just for the horses but for the knights too, was to paint over my organic and then replace around that painted area with some blocks. This technique I used a lot for making clothing and armor in this case because it helps it pop one layer or more away from the organic and it looks like it's laying on top. With this horse complete, I have to, again, very carefully add the knight on top. And I must say this armor was a lot more challenging than even the other armor because of all the details it involved. Looking back on this now, I think I may have misjudged my proportions and I ended up making the rider a little too big for the horse. But overall, I think it turned out okay and it just gives me something I can work on in the future. If you haven't noticed already, you can kind of see this theme I have going on with this knight, where there's a lot of spikes and a lot of sharp edges. And this is to contrast with the other knight's smooth, curved edges. Coloring the Dark Knight's armor was also very difficult since I was using a lot of gray tones. I was trying to mix in some darker black blocks, but then I didn't like how it was blending in with the horse, so I adjusted the colors on the armor several times before I was finally satisfied with it. Now I have just a few more final touches to add to this knight. I'm going to use the Loft tool to pop in this cape real quick and paint it this bright red to contrast with all these dark colors. With just some final touches to make to the base, I think this build is pretty much done. So with our battlefield set, let's go ahead and get a better look at this build. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that quick time lapse. I know I had a lot of fun building this. It did take a little longer than I expected it to, but I think the results speak for themselves. If you did enjoy it, be sure to let me know in the comments below, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again sometime.